after 9 years behind bars.
Mr. Simpson, I do vote to grant parole when eligible.
O.J. Simpson is going free. Also tonight, the president blasts his attorney general.
He should have told me before he took the job.
For recusing himself in the Russia investigation.
And I would have picked somebody else.
The special counsel takes aim at Trump business transactions.
Would that be a breach of what his actual...
I would say yes. Yeah, I would say yes.
Senator John McCain fights the battle of his life.
He is yelling at me to buck up. So I'm gonna buck up.
And a young boy's trip back in time.
Yeah, I think it's crazy.
This is the CBS Evening News.
And this is our Western edition. Good evening, I'm Anthony Mason. It was all very familiar. Millions of Americans glued to their televisions, waiting to hear the fate of O.J. Simpson. But it was 2 decades later, 2 decades after Simpson was acquitted of murder charges in the trial of the century. Today, the question was whether Simpson would be granted parole after serving 9 years in a Nevada prison in an unrelated case, an armed robbery in Las Vegas. Here's John Blackstone with the verdict.
Mr. Simpson, I do vote to grant parole when eligible, and that will conclude this hearing.
Thank you.
His relief was obvious. O.J. Simpson, now 70 years old, would soon be free on parole.
It was a serious crime, and there was no excuse for it.
The hearing via video conference lasted more than an hour as commissioners asked Simpson how prison had changed him.
Are you humbled by this incarceration?
Oh, yes, for sure.
While expressing regret, he insisted it was others who decided to bring guns. The day in Las Vegas, they robbed 2 memorabilia dealers of items Simpson believed had been stolen from him.
I'm no danger to pull a gun on anybody. I never have in my life. I've never been accused of it in my life.
One of the dealers robbed that day, Bruce Fromong, told the parole board Simpson had served enough time.
This is a good man. He made a mistake.
He truly is remorseful.
Simpson's oldest daughter, Arnell.
And we just want him to come home so that we can move forward for us, quietly.
I'm not a guy who lived a criminal life. I'm a pretty straight shooter.
But hanging over the hearing was the accusation in 1994 that Simpson had brutally murdered his ex-wife, Nicole, and her friend, Ron Goldman.
I've always thought I've been pretty good with people, and I've basically spent a conflict-free life.
One of the least self-aware moments that I've ever heard.
Law professor Lori Levinson.
Now, there are a lot of things you might say about O.J. Simpson. And you might even say, well, that acquittal was fair. But to say that he's led a conflict-free life, I don't think so.
Simpson will remain in prison until at least October 1st. He said he wants to return to Florida, where he lived before his Nevada conviction, but parole officials in both states must agree. Anthony?
John Blackstone outside the prison in Lovelock, Nevada. President Trump has had a very public falling out with Attorney General Jeff Sessions, the first member of the Senate to endorse his run for the White House. Here's Chip Reed.
He's an amazing man.
President Trump was once enamored with Attorney General Jeff Sessions.
I am pleased to endorse Donald Trump for the presidency of the United States.
But not anymore. In an extraordinarily candid interview with the New York Times, the president gave Sessions an angry public scolding for recusing himself from the Russia investigation.
Sessions should have never recused himself. And if he was going to recuse himself, he should have told me before he took the job, and I would have picked somebody else. It's extremely unfair, and that's a mild word, to the president.
Sessions was asked today if he's considering resigning.
I have the honor of serving as Attorney General, and I plan to continue to do so as long as that is appropriate.
The president also criticized special counsel Robert Mueller for accepting the job as head of the Russia investigation just 1 day after interviewing with Mr. Trump to be FBI director.
See, what the hell is this all about? Talk about conflicts. No, he was interviewing for the job.
And he again unleashed his fury at former FBI Director James Comey. In June, Comey told Congress that Mr. Trump instructed other advisors to leave the Oval Office, then asked Comey to drop the investigation of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn. But the president told the Times he did not shoo people out of the room.
I don't remember even talking to him about any of this stuff. His testimony is loaded up with lies.
In a long, rambling interview, the president also reminisced about his recent trip to Paris and to Napoleon's tomb. And he gave a history lesson about how Napoleon and Hitler lost major battles against Russia because their armies froze to death. The president seemed fascinated, mentioning it more than once that French President Emmanuel Macron has a fondness for holding hands. People don't realize he loves holding my hand, Mr. Trump said, and that's good as far as that goes.
A White House spokesperson said today that yes, President Trump is disappointed in Attorney General Sessions, but he has not lost confidence in him and has no plan to fire him. Anthony?
Chip Reed at the White House. Thank you, Chip. The special counsel is now looking into the Trump business empire in the investigation of Russian meddling in the U.S. election and whether anyone in the Trump campaign was involved. Here's Juliana Goldman.
In that New York Times interview, President Trump had a warning for special counsel Robert Mueller. Investigating his finances and his family's finances would cross a red line. I think that's a violation, he said. This is about Russia. But investigators are already examining the financial dealings of Mr. Trump and his associates, not limiting themselves to possible collusion with Russia in the 2016 election. Mr. Trump's business ties to Russia go back decades. The special counsel's mandate is broad and allows him to investigate any matters that arose or may arise directly from the investigation. CBS News has confirmed Mueller is also looking into the business dealings of former Trump campaign chairman Paul Manafort, an investigation initiated by prosecutors in the Southern District of New York.
Speaking for myself, I own nothing in Russia. I have no loans in Russia. I don't have any deals in Russia.
The head of the Public Corruption Unit at the Southern District, Andrew Goldstein, recently joined Mueller's team. He oversaw the Manafort probe. Prosecutor Andrew Weissman is another team member. His expertise, financial fraud. Weissman helped lead the federal task force that investigated corruption at energy giant Enron. With multiple and overlapping probes from the Department of Justice to Capitol Hill, some investigators are also looking into purchases of units in Trump properties. The Senate Intelligence Committee is pouring through thousands of pages of financial records from a unit in the Treasury Department that fights money laundering. In the New York Times interview, the president also said, quote, "It's possible there's a condo or something. I sell a lot of condo units and somebody from Russia buys a condo. Who knows?" He also said he doesn't make money from Russia. Anthony?
Juliana Goldman, thanks. We turn now to John Dickerson, our chief Washington correspondent and anchor of Face the Nation. John, these are pretty unusual remarks for a president to make about his attorney general, aren't they? What do you make of them?
Well, what makes these comments so unusual is the president is not criticizing a policy decision the attorney general made. He's making claims about the attorney general's character. He says it was unfair that the attorney general didn't tell him that he would recuse himself from the Russia investigation. Now, the attorney general deals with right and wrong, so questioning his fairness is different than if you were questioning another cabinet official. And the president also didn't seem to believe Attorney General Sessions' testimony about why he was not immediately forthcoming about his meetings with the Russian ambassador. The president said Sessions was asked, quote, simple questions, and that his answers, quote, should have been simple answers, but they weren't.
This interview comes as we mark 6 months now of the Trump administration. Where do you think this fits in the scope of his presidency?
Well, at 6 months in, President Trump in this interview is the same person as candidate Donald Trump. He is freewheeling, full of hyperbole, there are inaccuracies, and he's saying exactly what is on his mind, even if it breaks the normal rules. Whether those rules are about criticizing an attorney general or criticizing special counsel Mueller, even though that criticism could be considered interference in the investigation, which is one of the things the president is being investigated for. And all of this to the New York Times, which the president has criticized regularly. The office has not changed the man.
John Dickerson. Thank you very much, John. The Treasury Department fined ExxonMobil $2 million today for violating U.S. sanctions in 2014. when it signed contracts with a blacklisted Russian oil executive. Rex Tillerson was Exxon's CEO at the time and called sanctions ineffective. Now Secretary of State, Tillerson supports keeping them in place until Russia gives back Crimea. John McCain, the six-term senator from Arizona, 2008 Republican presidential candidate and Vietnam War hero, is fighting the biggest battle of his life, the enemy, an aggressive form of brain cancer. Here's Chief Congressional Correspondent Nancy Cordes.
We're rooting for you, dear friend. If anybody's going to beat a disease like this, it's going to be John McCain.
Senator McCain put up with the emotion for about 12 hours. The last straw was this tribute from his friend Lindsey Graham.
I can't think of anything I've done since 1999 politically, in many ways personally, that was worth doing without John.
McCain, recovering in Phoenix, intervened.
He has called me 3 times this morning. No more woe is me, Lindsey. He is yelling at me to buck up.
I greatly appreciate the outpouring of support, McCain tweeted. Unfortunately for my sparring partners in Congress, I'll be back soon.
Lieutenant Commander John McCain.
Tough talk from a man who survived 5.5 years as a prisoner of war in Vietnam and has spent 3 decades honing a take-no-prisoners style on Capitol Hill.
You know, it's really embarrassing to hear you say something like that. It was a waste of time because they had no information.
It's unfair. It's bizarro.
That straight talk has endeared him to both sides. Many senators pointed today to this moment in his run against then-Senator Obama.
He's an Arab. No, ma'am. He's a decent family man.
And he said, I'm feeling good. I may have some chemo to get through.
Arizona's junior senator, Jeff Flake, spoke to McCain last night.
John McCain is a tough guy. Yeah. This is a very tough form of cancer.
It is, and he knows that. His family certainly knows that.
McCain has experience battling cancer. He had 4 melanomas removed between 1993 and 2002. And Anthony, we're told that it was Lindsey Graham who noticed that McCain seemed run down lately and urged him to go get checked.
Nancy Cordes at the Capitol. Thank you, Nancy. Joining us now, our chief medical correspondent, Dr. John LaPook. John, what exactly is the senator up against here?
Anthony, the problem is that glioblastoma is a really rough tumor to treat. And what happens is, even though you think you're taking out the tumor and it looks like you have, microscopically it's already spread to other parts of the brain, so it tends to come back. And in fact, the median survival is only about 15 months. 10% of people live 5 years or longer, and this is the same cancer that killed Senator Ted Kennedy.
So what are the treatment options for the senator then?
Well, he had surgery, and then he's going to get chemotherapy and radiation. But after that, there are some exciting new possibilities. And one of them addresses the fact that cancer tends to hide from the immune system. It kind of cloaks itself in a cloak of invisibility, and the idea is to strip away that cloak. And at Duke University, they're taking inactivated poliovirus. They're injecting it directly into the cancer to stimulate the immune system to come and kill it. They're having some really interesting results from that.
So I've heard that getting medicine into the brain can be very difficult, though.
That's exactly right. It's called the blood-brain barrier, and it's hard for the drugs to get in. And one really interesting approach is to use nanoparticles. You put the medication inside those, and you use it to sneak in to the brain, and then it gets released and hopefully will fight the cancer. But at the end of the day, this is a tough cancer. The senator is certainly in for a big fight, and we need a ton more research.
All right. Dr. John LaPook, thank you. Late today, the Minneapolis police chief spoke for the first time about the fatal police shooting of a yoga instructor from Australia. The chief was critical of the officer's actions. Jamie Yukas is in Minneapolis. Jamie?
Minneapolis Police Chief Janae Harteau, Anthony, started with a very strong statement saying Justine did not have to die. Justine Damond was shot to death by Minneapolis police officer Mohammed Noor when she walked up to the squad car at one point after dialing 911 twice, thinking that she was reporting a supposed rape behind her home. Now, Chief Harteau said that she talked to Justine Damon's fiance, Don, just this morning, and that he expressed to her that people are now scared to call 911. She said the department does need to regain the community's trust at this point, and she also reassured her family that she will do everything in her power to make sure justice is served for Justine. The officer and his partner, Matthew Harity, did not have their body cameras rolling at the time, and this is an important piece for many in this community wondering why that happened. The chief said that she understands that, and she will look into it and hopes to make changes there. Officer Noor has not given a statement at this point to investigators in the independent investigation, Anthony, and we did learn that the police chief spoke for the first time today because she was on a backpacking trip until yesterday.
Jamie Yukas with breaking news in Minneapolis. Thank you. Coming up next on the CBS Evening News, it's full speed ahead for self-driving cars, but federal laws are lagging behind. And later, a young boy's ancient discovery. Car companies are racing to get self-driving cars on U.S. highways, but federal regulators are playing catch-up. Here's Chris Van Cleve.
Starting next year, a largely autonomous Audi hits the highways.
I can take over any time by just grabbing the wheel.
This fall, students at the University of Michigan will be hopping on this driverless bus across campus. Car makers are promising mass-market, fully self-driving vehicles by 2021, and tech companies like Uber and Google could deploy them much sooner. California is already readying its roads, replacing raised lane markers with 6-inch thick solid lines because they're easier for self-driving cars to see. But what's not ready are the rules. Scott Keogh from Audi.
So I think we need definitions. We need the government and the states to set laws that are all united and unified around this, and there needs to be a little bit less P.T. Barnummism when everyone's throwing around these terms.
Right now, only 23 states in the District of Columbia have laws on the books about self-driving cars.
As this technology gets out on the road, we want to make sure it is safe, that it truly is ready for prime time.
The concept behind this bill is to try and create some certainty, some clarity, so that people know what those rules are going to be.
That could happen in the coming days. Republican Senator John Thune and Democrat Gary Peters plan to present rare bipartisan legislation setting standards for safety, cybersecurity, and guidelines to determine accident liability if no one's driving. Do you feel real deadline pressure then to get this done?
It's only a matter of time, and that horizon is coming very quickly at us, and I think we have to be prepared for that.
Hopefully we can all get around the fact that this is incredibly exciting technology that's going to save literally tens of thousands of lives.
And they believe it will do that because self-driving cars should eliminate one of the leading factors in crashes, human error. Anthony?
Chris Van Cleve in Washington, thanks. And when we come back, a dusty old bag sells for an astronomical price. In Spain, the remains of renowned artist Salvador Dali were exhumed today and will be tested to determine if he had a daughter. Pilar Abel, now 61, claims she was conceived when her mother had an affair with Dali. Abel is a fortune teller, and if DNA proves her story, she could inherit a fortune, a quarter of Dali's nearly $500 million estate. On this 48th anniversary of the first moonwalk, a lawyer from Illinois saw her bank account take one giant leap. A bag containing moon dust collected by Neil Armstrong sold at auction for $1.8 million. The buyer was not identified. The seller, Nancy Carlson, purchased the bag for less than $1,000 in a government auction. Up next, an out-of-this-world discovery here on Earth and the young boy who made it.
This portion of the CBS Evening News is sponsored by Ancestry DNA. Unlock your past, inspire your future.
Finally tonight, it was quite a trip for a young boy. It took him back in time, about 1 million years. Here's Jim Axelrod.
For the last few months, Jude Sparks has been learning some uncommon things. Uncommon for 10-year-olds anyway.
How to tell stegomastodon from mammoth, how to tell tusk from bone, and that's about it.
Jude has been working at an excavation site near his home in New Mexico, digging up the fossilized remains of a prehistoric elephant ancestor called the stegomastodon. Even more uncommon for a 10-year-old, Jude discovered it. He and his family were out for a walk last November when he tripped and came face to face with what he thought was a cow skeleton.
The only part of the jaw I saw was the two teeth, this part of the bone, and that part of the bone.
He called for his mom, Michelle, to take a look.
It was very unusual. We knew it was something, the coloring was different. It wasn't what you usually see.
It looked old?
It looked old, yes.
So they called the professor at New Mexico State who confirmed it was 1 million years old. Experts then started to excavate, with Jude helping. So far, they've got the skull, jaw, and tusks.
And this little boy will be able to show off to his friends or even his own children when he's older and say, look what I found.
But this 10-year-old budding paleontologist isn't done yet.
Rider bikes, and I just keep looking on the ground to see if I can find another something.
Not after what he found, tripping over ancient history. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, New York.
It looked old, 1 million years old. Well, that's the elephant he'll never forget. That's the CBS Evening News. I'm Anthony Mason in New York. Thanks for watching. Good night.